In this video, we're going to look at some ideas about variables. We're going to start off with the variable that we were introduced to in a previous video called the integer. I'm going to declare and initialize an integer. I'm going to call it my value. Make it equal to 10,000. Okay, I'm going to print this out. So I'm going to go sys out control space, and just to see that this is indeed 10,000. I'm going to run this, and I get 10,000 there. Now, sometimes we can, instead of using a comma, I can put in an underscore, and that will also give me kind of some separation in the digits. You know, when they start getting really big, let's say, 1 million or 1 billion. Again, it won't print out clearly in terms of, with commas and stuff. Oops. Oh, out of range. This is actually a topic that we're going to come to later. So I'll just do 10 million there. And it won't print with the commas or anything, but at least in the code, it is more legible. Okay. So system.out.print line my value just gives us our initial, our integer, which I've named my value. But here's the thing. You saw earlier that I did have an error message when I put in 3 more zeros. Okay. And let me just run that again. It said something about the literal 10 billion of type int is out of range. What does that mean? So this goes to the idea of data types, they store they have a certain number of bytes, okay? And beyond that, you can't, it can only hold so many numbers, because beyond that, it's what is known as an overflow. Okay, it's too big of a number to be stored as an int. So how big of a number, how big of an integer can you store as an integer? Well, let's find out. I'm going to declare an int. I'm going to call it my minimum, or actually let's start with max. My max int value. I'm going to go integer. Okay, an integer here is known as a wrapper class. Max value, I'm just going to use this. Wrapper class is basically a bunch of methods that you can perform on, in this case, integers. Okay, and I'm going to print this out. I'm going to do my max int value, and let's see what happens. So I got to change that back. That's good. Let's see what happens now when I run this. Well, this is an interesting number. What is it here? 2,147,483,647. In other words, the largest integer that you can input into the int data type is this one here. Okay. What's the smallest? Well, I can take this and do the same kind of idea, except by instead of having max though, I can have int. And instead of max value, I can put min value and my min int value. If I save this and run it, you'll notice that it's very similar to the first one, except that it is 648 instead of 647, and it's also a negative. And that's the smallest. Well, what happens if I try to put in a bigger number? Okay. Well, this is known as overflow, and I'm going to show you in a second right now what happens. I'm going to go sys out. I'm going to call this busted max value. Okay, equals. And again, everything inside here is a string literal. In other words, it can't be modified. Anything inside the the quotes. I'm going to put a plus there, and you'll see that plus does not mean addition in a second. I'm going to do my max int value, and I'm going to add a 1 to it. So let's see what happens when I do that, and I'll just put maybe brackets around it to keep my order of operations nice and clean. When I do that, look what happens. Instead of going to 64214483648, that value goes back to the min. So kind of think of it like a, going circular. Once you add 1 to that, it's going to go back to this. In fact, if I add a 2, let's see what happens, and I run this. It's 1 more. And if I add a 3, you'll get 646 at the end. Okay? And so on and so forth. In other words, you can't go any further than this value as an integer when the data type you've declared is an int. Okay? There's a name for this, by the way. This is called Overflow. Underflow is the other way around. Instead of the busted max value, I'm going to look at the busted min value. And I'll call this my min int value. And instead of adding 1, I'm going to subtract 1. And like I said, this is called underflow. Let's run this. Let's see what happens. And you'll notice that the number I come to is the same as the max int value. Okay, by subtracting 1, by going even lower, I end up at the very top of my ints. So the last thing I wanted to bring your attention to is this plus sign. It's not really adding my int value, or let's go to this one, my max int value. Okay, like this plus sign means different than the plus sign over here. Okay, in line 19. The second plus sign, the plus 1, literally means an addition. Whereas the plus sign over here, which is connected to this string literal, okay, means that you're concatenating or adding on whatever the result of this is to the text that's inside the quotes. So if I run this, okay, you'll notice that line 19 is going to be here, busted max value. I don't have that plus, negative 21478, yada, yada, yada. Okay, it's just taking whatever the result of this stuff here is and putting it after the text of what's in the quotes. Okay, so something very different than, just adding. So that plus has 2 meanings in Java, addition or concatenation.